So are you on a GLP-1 and you have the sulfur burps? So let's talk about why. I'm Tiffany, I'm a physician assistant, and I've been practicing internal medicine for a long time. So people who are on GLP-1s generally will complain about 7 to 10% of the time of a new side effect, and they always come in and tell me my burps smell like rotten eggs, or sometimes they'll tell me I have the sulfur burps. So what's going on? So we know that when you start a GLP-1 like Semaglutide, or to a lesser extent Tirzepatide, that it can actually change the biome or the gut bacteria that lives in your stomach. So these bacteria are actually responsible for breaking down and digesting your food. So there are certain bacteria that tend to produce more sulfur when they break down food. And so it can lead to an overgrowth in these particular bacteria when you're taking a GLP-1 medication. If all of a sudden you have way more of these bacteria breaking down your food, then you're going to have way more sulfur gas being produced. If you've got way more gas in your stomach, it has one or two ways. It's either got to go up or down. So it's not just going to sit in your stomach, or else you're going to be very, very bloated and very uncomfortable. But it's always distressing for people to come in and they tell me, oh my gosh, my burps are smelling like rotten eggs. So what do we do to fix it? So a lot of times what I will explain to people is that when you get on a GLP-1, a lot of people get on a GLP-1 and they continue to eat the way that they've always ate. And although this is not wrong, I think eventually they learn that they really have to modify their eating in order to really have the best result. Because a GLP-1 really changes the way that you digest your food and the speed in which you digest your food, there's certain foods that either maybe you're just not going to digest well anymore, or maybe you just can't eat at certain times of the day. So let me give you some examples. So things like meat, eggs, certain vegetables like broccoli, collard greens, and even some dairy products are going to have much higher sulfur content. When you very first start a GLP-1 and maybe you get a little bit of an overgrowth in that bacteria that will produce more sulfur, I would expect you to start getting some increase of the sulfur burps. Now, usually this will level out, but let's just say that at the beginning you're going to eat like you've always ate, maybe a little bit less because you're not as hungry. But if you're typically somebody who just eats a really big, heavy meal in the evening, and especially if you eat late and then you go to lay down like about an hour or so after you eat because you're tired and you want to go right to bed, this is not going to be an amazing plan for you if you're on a GLP-1, because the food is not going to digest quickly. It slows it down, and so that food is going to sit in your stomach and ferment, create gas, and then you're going to get super bloated and then super nauseated. It's just not going to be a good situation. So what I find for most people, that you really have to change the way you eat. And I think this is where the long-term habits come in, is that if you just eat the way you've always ate and you're just simply taking the medicine, when you stop the medicine eventually, of course, nothing's going to change. But if we can change the way you eat and really change your habits, we can create some lasting health effects. So for example, let's just say maybe that instead of eating a big heavy meal at the end of the day where you maybe are going to go to bed pretty soon, maybe you're going to start transitioning to where you're going to eat your bigger meal in the middle of the day, because you know that you're still going to have 7 or 8 hours of being upright after you eat that meal. That for most of my GLP-1 people is going to be a much better plan than eating a heavy meal at the end of the day. There's also certain foods that if you eat in moderation, they will be okay, but if you eat in great quantities of, maybe not so good. So like I talked about vegetables, so lots of sulfur containing vegetables, onions, broccoli, cauliflower, collard greens, things like that can create a lot of sulfur gas. So, although we generally consider salads healthy, maybe when you're very first starting a GLP-1, we don't want to go overboard on salads. Or maybe if you do eat a salad, maybe we don't want to eat a lot of meat and eggs with that meal, just because we don't want to just overdo all this sulfur containing foods. We do need to let your belly kind of get adjusted to the GLP-1 and how it's going to do with your stomach. So that being said, sulfur burps can be completely normal when you're starting a GLP-1. Sometimes at higher doses, they seem worse, but sometimes I find that people tend to get them at the beginning before they really kind of learn to modify their eating. To me, this is just clinically, I do think it seems worse on Semaglutide than it does on Tirzepatide. But again, that's just clinically, that is not necessarily a scientific fact. So if this is something you're struggling with and you have found some tips, I would love to hear about those. Just drop those in the comments. If a GLP-1 is something that you are wanting to try, let me know. And there's a link in the bio for you to see if you can get access or eligibility for these meds. So, all right, let me know what you think. Y'all have a good day.